31st, yeah.
Okay, there you go. No more Jennifer Pompilio to do.
Okay, it looks like it can see me, so that's good.
It can see you.
We'll start from there. Got it propped up with some envelopes on the back. Oh, wonderful, we have some new participants. Hi, Kevin. I'm so happy that we have so many of you here.
Hi.
I've already got you on videotape, so don't say anything you wouldn't want anybody to know about.
I tried to get Jan to come, but she wasn't feeling up to it.
Oh, okay. Well, pull up a chair, and I think I had already handed out all of the printouts that I have, so
I haven't read the
maybe
materials yet,
a
so I
couple
have-
of you could
I'm-
share
Okay, absolutely.
with each other as
Thank you.
we follow along together.
You have it on your phone, okay.
Yeah, we can share.
We can share,
So-
okay, you guys share, and let's Stephen have this one, I guess.
No, we're set.
I got
We have it on,
mine, so
Stephen has it on his
No,
phone.
Stephen doesn't
Stephen,
have one, so
Stephen.
let Stephen
Yeah,
have
I
that.
stole yours.
Oh, here we go, you got it, we're all okay, all right.
We're fine.
And so we're all gonna be videoed, and then the way that I'm thinking, I'm just ebullient, you know what that means, happy, that all of you are here. I thought on a Monday night, snowy and all, there wouldn't be that many. I thought I was gonna be talking to a blank camera. And, so it's really wonderful to have everybody here. And I wanna be sure that everyone knows each other. Mary Pat and Kevin.
How do you do? Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Stephanie.
Hi, Stephanie.
John.
Hi, John.
Beverly.
And Beverly.
Beverly.
Steve,
Mary Pat and Kevin.
and Rick.
Hi, Rick.
Yeah. So here's how I thought we'd go through this. The purpose of the class is to prepare those who are going to be received and or confirmed when the bishop comes on January the 12th. But I also thought it was a good opportunity for anybody else to join in and have the discussion. And it's also fun for me to review the stuff because, you know, when you're going through seminary, you learn what an Episcopalian is and you do all this stuff. It's nice to go back and revisit it in a kind of a different light as you move through a ministry. So tonight, we're gonna start on page 7 of the book. And this is the introduction, and it's called Transforming Questions. And the topic of this introduction is sort of introducing us to the concept of what an Episcopalian is and how we base our faith and how we express our faith in the church and in our lives. And so the introduction says on page 7, down about 2/3 of the way down that page, it says, with that in mind, your faith, your life contains basic information for Episcopalians who want to deepen their knowledge of the Episcopal Church, and for those who are considering making the Episcopal Church their church home. And beyond that, the book suggests a path for those who are seeking an understanding of their faith and their life, as well as having a deeper conversation and conversion as they walk with God, which is what we're going to be doing here over the next 5 weeks, is trying to understand how God permeates our lives on a daily basis, and then how we express that to one another and to the world around us. And it cautions us down in the very bottom paragraph to be attentive, to be intelligent, to be reasonable, to be responsible, and to be in love. And that will help you frame the questions as you read through these chapters and try to understand who we are in community together with one another and who we are to those around us in the outside world. Oftentimes we get very isolated in the church and tend to keep our faith just within us and don't express it in a way that that draws others into our community or draws others into a relationship with God, because we get embarrassed or we get fearful that they're going to think we're weird or whatever, and we don't often say to people that we see on the street, if they're not a person that we know to be of the Christian faith, we reserve ourselves. And my position is that people, when they see us and talk to us, and that we can relate to them on a personal level, whether it's just in the grocery store or, you know, filling up your car at the gas station or whatever it is, that we exude something that's different from other people around us sometimes. And that people are drawn to that. People are drawn to a happy face. Other people are drawn to what they see as a spirit that is within us, and that without even saying to them anything about God or Christ, that there is a magnet, that we are magnets for others around us. And that's what this faith is about. That's what Jesus was about. That's what Jesus did. Jesus didn't preach. He preached to the disciples. He preached to crowds that came. But when he encountered people on the face of the earth, what he did was reach out to them and give them love and give them hope. And they were drawn to him. And that's what I think this is all about, we as Christians are all about now. It's not about evangelization to the whole world. It's about being that person that people are drawn to, and people receive, and people love, and people want to be with. And that's who we are as Christians. That's not in the book. That's just me talking. On the bottom of page 8, it's talking about welcome, which is what I was just expressing. It says, this book will help you be attentive to your unique and particular journey of faith by introducing the language and practice of your worship, the stories of the Bible and the people and the events of church history, and what's called the polity of the Episcopal Church. The polity meaning the expression of our faith in society, and how we talk about that, how we discuss it with other people. And it says, knowing the words of our faith will help you name and own your experience, allowing you to reflect and share them with others. So that as you read this book and as you journey with your community, be attentive. It may help. In this book, authenticity and integrity are synonyms to which the continuing practices called for by the imperatives creative path. What that means to me is that every one of us has our own personal journeys, and all of our personal journeys are expressed, you know, in our hearts. And we need to be able to tell those stories, tell those journeys to people around us, because each of us has our own unique experiences that draw us closer to God, or on the other hand, sometimes push us away from God. And we need to be able to learn that and express it and understand what draws us closer to the heart of God and what causes us to feel isolated from God. And being able to talk about that with other people is an important part of what the community of church is about. Each of you has your own personal stories of faith and why you're here tonight. Each of us has our own personal stories about what we do in our everyday lives that are important, and that's what helps create a community and draws us together as a community. So that's what we'll be talking about. That's what we'll be sort of defining and looking at as we go through this book. Down at the bottom of page 9, it says, in the last paragraph, about halfway, choose the meaning to which you are drawn and live with it for a while. Does it make sense in the light of other experiences you have had? And I think the question that it's asking there is, as you hear the stories of the Bible, and as you hear the stories of the church and how we define our view of God, how does that relate to you personally? Does it make sense in your own lives? Because one of the things that the Episcopal Church does is it says, you don't leave your brain outside the door when you come in here. You bring your brain with you. It is not purely an intellectual exercise, but it is part an intellectual exercise. And if things make sense, you're more able to accept them, through your faith. If things don't make sense to you, then, you always have the ability to question. And part of what the Episcopal Church says is question. Feel free to question. Feel free to doubt. Feel free to say, I don't understand that. I'm not sure I believe that. I want to know more. And so that's what we're going to be talking about. And that's what I encourage everyone who comes through these doors to ask and to talk about when we come to church. Because if it doesn't fit logically for you, it's not going to land, in here. So I think that's an important thing. On the top of page 11, we're talking about transforming questions in this chapter. And it says, look again at the headings in the table of contents. Seeking the truth involves being attentive, intelligent, and reasonable. Seeking the good involves being responsible. Seeking God involves being in love in an unrestricted way as God's love floods your heart. All of these involve an intentional dwelling with questions meant to transform the seeker. The seeker is us. We're all seekers. We're always seekers. We're always looking for a new level of understanding about God. I never think I understand God. I've got to always ask, what in the hell are you talking about when I read this thing, and say, okay, how does that fit for me? How does that work for me in the relationship that I have with God? And oftentimes in prayer, I don't have the answers, and you just have to kind of keep on looking and keep on seeking and keep on asking. And that's why it says all of these things involve an intentional dwelling with the questions meant to transform the seeker, which is us. And then down a little lower on page 11 in the in the first full paragraph, it says being in love means being open to transformation in God, self-transcendence, which is self-change, visualizing yourself with open hands, palms turned up position of prayer, being open to the mystery that grounds your being. And then it says you've got to experience and be open to multiple conversions. We hear these words often from different sects of S-E-C-T-S, of Christianity, of, quote, being saved, as if it's a one-time event. Personally, my view is not that it's a one-time event. My view is that it's a recurring event, that we are continually on the pathway to transforming ourselves in the image of God and being open to others who also are in the image of God. And that's not something we do on a one-time deal. It's something we do repetitively. And we have to be open to it to be able to see it happening in our lives. I'm not criticizing my brothers and sisters who say, I was saved on March 3rd, 1948. That's not, come on, So it to me, it's not a one-time event. It's a recurring thing. You have to be open to it every single day, or you lose sight of whatever change has occurred within you as you go along. So I don't want to just keep on talking uninterrupted. We got a while to cover this stuff. So do any of you have some observations or questions about what I've said, or things that strike you about the material that we've gone through so far that you would like to comment on or make an observation about? Mary Pat.
What draws me here every day is that the questioning and the ability to criticize or critique or wonder or question or all of that was never part of my childhood.
Yeah.
The whole Roman Catholic Church was sit down and memorize this.
Yeah.
And it's so, I've been on this path for a long time. Kevin and I went to a Jesuit college, and there you were allowed to question.
Yeah.
and that was in the 1970s.
Mhm.
But you didn't question when you got back home. I mean, I'm
Right.
not talking about my family life, I'm talking about in the church. There wasn't much, you know, it was
Right.
my way or the highway, kind of.
Mhm.
So this is transformative, to be able
Good.
to see how does it apply to my life, and what fits and what doesn't fit, and what do I do about the parts that don't fit, or whatever.
Mhm.
It's just very interesting to be able to, it's great, it energizes me to hear you say, come in and bring your intellect in and question and see how it fits for your life. It's really,
Yeah.
it's an incredible gift. I feel sorry for people that think it has to be a certain way, because then if it does, just as an example, I'm reading this book right now about, and there's a homosexual marriage coming about, and these brides are very happy, and it made me think about all the years and years that people couldn't, that square peg didn't fit into that round hole.
Right.
And here it's so open and accepting,
Yeah,
and free to be the person you are. I just think it's really,
yeah.
it's a wonderful, safe place.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because I think it is a large part of our Episcopal faith that we are open to those, what I call other types of relationships, which have not been accepted historically in any of the Christian faith, and particularly in some of the other denominations. And as you all probably know by now, I have a transgender daughter, and she is one of the sweetest, kindest persons and most devout souls I've ever known. And she is repeatedly rejected because of who she is. And I just don't see that as true Christianity. Now, I'm not going to critique or argue with someone who sees it differently. And I've had many occasions to critique and argue with that, you can imagine. But that's the way they think is the way they think, and I'm not gonna change them, my own self. That's not for me to do. That's right, that's for God to do. So, but it is for me to accept every human being and give them their own dignity, regardless of what they express outwardly about themselves. So I am really, really grateful that the Episcopal faith is open to differences. That's one of the things that I love about the Episcopal Church. But there are still people in the Episcopal Church, and there are still places you'll find in the Episcopal Church, perhaps even here in this very parish, that would disagree with me. But that's okay.
But we're all accepted under the same roof.
Right. We're all accepted under the same roof. We all worship the same God, and we all believe in the same values. We may express them differently, but that's what's, to me, beautiful about being a part of this parish, because there's not a judgment. When I gave the sermon the Sunday that I told everyone in this parish about my daughter, everyone came up to me and hugged me, and was gracious and open and loving, and that's what matters, right? That's what matters, which is one of the things I love about this place.
Well, and it seems to me that that's where, when you talk about approaching this in love, that's what it's about. If you come in predetermined on what something is going to be or how it should be, then you're not open to learn about things. You
Yeah.
can't learn about things that you don't understand, right?
Exactly.
So it's important to, like, I'm always trying to learn, but that I used to teach, so that's part of who I am. But it's so important. I've had periods in my life where I've been very, very angry. I've had a lot of sad and challenging things happen in the last decade or so. And it's when I've given up being angry
Mm-hmm.
and kind of put that away and said, that's counterproductive to what I need for the quality of my life, that I've been able to find this church, find the direction that I need to go in next, and help the rest of my family who's also struggling. I don't know how many or if any of you know, I lost my son 4 years ago.
Oh.
My oldest son was a soldier, and he
Oh.
died after his service, and it was
Oh.
a long struggle before we lost him. He'd become a heroin addict, and it was a very long struggle, and it was incredibly challenging to me to forgive the people who I thought could have served him better.
Right.
And the only reason I was able to do that was because I realized that the things and the people that I loved were way more important than the anger that I held. And I loved my other children and needed for them to be well. And that's part of the reason I'm here now, because every Sunday I come in, I feel like you're talking to me.
Me too.
It's just the most amazing thing. And I go out like, Mom's in good shape again. Let's start the week.
That's wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
I'm glad that we can be that place. for you.
This is definitely my safe place to fall.
Good. Well, that's what the church should be, right? The church should be a safe home for everyone.
It wasn't when I was in the Catholic Church. I didn't feel
Yeah, I
that way.
understand. And there's a certain dogma that the Catholic Church feels is important to them, and that's fine. It doesn't fit for everyone. And so, we're here because we have a little bit different skew on things, which is what we're talking about. We bring our minds to it. And when we bring our minds to it, it may sound a little bit different than what somebody else wants it to sound like, right? And so we need to be free to be able to express those things. So thank you both for saying that. On page 13, it says, "We do not know God directly. Our families, the Jewish and Christian scriptures, Jesus, church, culture, friends, icons, images, and communication technologies have all this in common. They are only lenses and filters through which we look and to try to understand the visions and the values that we live by, and they are all mediated through our own experience." And down in the next paragraph it says, "For there is one God, there is also one mediator between God and humankind, Christ Jesus. Long ago, God spoke to our ancestors in many and various ways by the prophets. But in the last days, he's spoken to us by a Son, who is the reflection of God's glory and the exact imprint of God's very being." So I think what that is saying is that we look at the life of Christ through what we understand from the Gospels and what the Gospels tell us about his sayings, his teaching, and his being, and who he touched and who he was. But every one of the Gospel stories has so many ways of being interpreted, right? And so that comes from our own personal experience. We can put ourselves, if we put ourselves in that history, in that place, in that time, we can try to find ways to understand what God means through the sayings and the teachings and the being of Christ. And so many people will interpret something that Christ said in a different way. And that doesn't necessarily mean that their lenses are the wrong lenses, but if we have lenses that are capable of seeing in a lot of different ways, maybe it helps us to understand what Christ means when he says something, what he was doing on a certain occasion when he said something to a human being. It's all sort of shrouded in a cloak or in a cloud of mystery at times, and it takes a little bit of sort of historical knowledge to try to interpret some things. I had a professor in seminary who was just a lovely guy, and he said that you look at Scripture from three different perspectives: from the text, which is the actual writing, and from the things behind the text, which was the history at the time that it was being written. But you also look at it from in front of the text, meaning your own life, your own personal experiences, and whether or not the text and the language makes sense in your world. And so we have to try to gather all that together and assimilate it and try to get an understanding of what it means. And I think the most important way to look at it is for what it means and how we treat people around us and the rest of the world and humanity. And that's the most important lens through how we have to interpret the things that are in the Bible. So let's go on to the bottom of page 16. And it says that about the halfway down the last paragraph, this is the theology I have absorbed over the past 35 years in the Episcopal Church. Some call it a theology of incarnation. That is, God continues to become flesh. That for me is the core of our church's belief. God among us, seeing God in people, regardless of religion, ethnicity, nationality, or sexuality. Meaning that we look for God in everyone that we encounter, and we may find it, we may find it in a different form than we expected. And if we're open to that, we can say, okay, this person is an expression of God. Every single human being was made in God's image. Sin and hardship and life circumstances change people along the way, but there's always something of God in every person we see that's there for us. Whether it's a homeless guy on the street who says F you to me every time I try to get him to come in for a hot meal, and then turns around a year later and becomes a missionary for outreach to other homeless people, that's what I see, and that's what I've seen. And experiencing all those different things in life is so important, because it's a way for us to discover who God is and where God is and the places that we can find God. And I think it's so easy for us to only look for God in the places that we think we traditionally find God, like here in church, or whatever other gathering that we have, as opposed to out in the world. That's where Christ encountered the people that were changed by him, and by the way that changed him. So it's a mutual thing. We get changed by the people we encounter, and we help change them all at the same time. So it's not a one-way street when we're encountering God everywhere we go. It's sort of a mutual beneficial thing for all of us. So let's go on to page 18 in chapter 1. It's talking in this chapter about the beginnings, and it has stories about Genesis and the waters of creation and how life developed, and then it goes on to the waters of Jesus' baptism and ties those two things as sort of a singular event in the way that God created the world to begin with, and then God baptized, John the Baptist baptized Jesus in the waters, and it ties our sacraments into that knowledge of God's creation in the very beginning is at work in us, every human being at work when they're born. And there's all sorts of really good imagery in the lessons, the gospel lessons, about creation and the mother's womb and the water and all of that. So that's a whole study in and of itself, and we don't need to go into all that detail, but the waters of birth and rebirth on page 19 is a really good read, I think, to sort of give you an idea of why we have baptism, what that sacrament means, and how when we baptize one into our community, how that bonds us with them and with God in a unity of the Spirit. So that's something that really deserves a more in-depth reading. And then it goes on page 20 to talk about baptism in the early church and how they made that a ritual that was very important to the meaning of what they were doing as they became a part of the community of the church. And we still do that. We still baptize little kids, and we baptize older people too. I've seen very, very beautiful baptismal services of people who were in their 70s, and it's a really cool, and wonderful experience. But it gives you a little bit of history of baptism in the early church, which is really important. We've kind of fallen away from that a little bit in the way that we do it in our church. But the important part of it is on page 21, and the baptismal covenant. And I've made reference to this in my sermons often, And it, and we've, of course, done it when we baptized the two babies that have been baptized since I got here. And we recite the baptismal covenant together, which is that we seek the face of God in every human being. And we believe in the dignity of every human being, and that's a very, very important part of our baptismal covenant. A lot of people think our baptismal covenant is just making promises of what we will do in our own actions, but even deeper than that is not just what we do, but what we believe and what we live in our life. And if we only say, you know, baptismal covenant is we believe this and we believe this and we believe this, that's important, but it's not complete. It's not complete until we say, this is what we do in our lives. This is how we live out our own lives by our baptism and through our baptism and through our incorporation into the life of Christ. This is what we actually do, which causes us, our baptismal covenant arises from within us, not from some thing out here that we have to check off. You know, it arises within us. This is what we believe and this is what we do, what our beliefs cause us to do on an everyday basis. So I'm gonna stop for just a second. I'm gonna turn this off and then start it again, so be sure I can get it all posted on the